Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. We always get really excited when February rolls along each year at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants because we kick all the men out for the month and host exclusively women in science, adventure, exploration, and conservation from all over the world. So some of you may know February 11th was the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And we've had a ton of events leading up to that. And we still have about 2.5 weeks of awesome events still to come. So we hope to see your classrooms joining us for some of those live events. Well, keeping things rolling along today, we are really lucky to have Erin Spencer hanging out with us today. Erin is a marine ecologist, a science communicator who uses photography and writing to share stories of innovative approaches to conservation. So she's been a multiple grantee with National Geographic. Her current work is examining the rate of seafood mislabeling in Southeastern United States. And previously, she studied invasive species, particularly the lionfish in Western Atlantic and the Caribbean. And through the Invasive Species Initiative that she launched in 2014, she's traveled all over the world in search of creative ways people are combating invasive species in their own backyards. So Erin, we've got a great group of classrooms joining us from across North America, some of them on camera, some of them on YouTube. And we're really looking forward to getting to know you a little better today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. And hello, everyone. I am so excited to be with you today. This is one of my favorite events, especially celebrating awesome women in science. So I'm honored to be with you. And I would love to show you some slides of the photos that I work on because I get to work in the ocean, and it's much more interesting to look at the photos that I have of the ocean than to just watch me. So I'm going to pull up some slides really quickly. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can you see this okay?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, fishy business.
Okay, awesome. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about the research that I do, but also kind of what it's like to just be in the field of marine ecology. I feel so lucky every day that I get to get up in the morning and study the ocean. And I'm going to take you through what my days kind of look like, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the research that I do. So I'm Erin. It is very nice to meet you all. I am, as Joe mentioned, a marine ecologist, meaning that I am really interested about the organisms that live in the ocean and how they interact with one another. I'm also really interested in how we as people interact with our ocean and what we can do to help protect it. I am also a huge scuba diver. Any day that I get to be in the ocean is a good day. So this photo was actually taken in the Galapagos Islands, and it was pretty cold. And you can see I've got this hood to keep me warm on top, but still enjoying it. I got scuba certified when I was a teenager. As soon as my parents would let me, I got certified in a really, really cold, really murky quarry in Pennsylvania, there was really nothing to see there except for dirt, but I still loved it. And then I went on to college where I went to my undergrad in Williamsburg, Virginia, which is not far from the ocean. And I got to spend a lot of time in my classes as a marine science and ecology major, just getting to study fish and getting to learn more about what I liked and didn't like about ocean conservation and the sort of the areas that I wanted to study. I absolutely love fish. I sometimes have to remind myself that not everyone loves fish quite as much as I do and wouldn't want to get quite as up close and personal with them, but you can just see I'm having the time of my life. But what I do now, I've actually continued to move south, and I've moved to working on some even bigger organisms. So now I study sharks. I'm in Miami at Florida International University, and I study how sharks move and interact with their environment. And this photo was taken in the Bahamas, where we were diving with hammerhead sharks. And this photo is not zoomed in. This is exactly how close I was to this hammerhead shark. And it was the coolest dive I have ever done. And a lot of people ask me if I'm like scared about shark attacks or anything. And these sharks were so not interested in me. So he got right up close to me and I didn't look like a tasty dinner, so he didn't mind me being there in the slightest. We also take samples from sharks. This is kind of a snapshot of what some of the field work looks like. We're really interested in knowing where the sharks are eating and what they're eating. So sometimes we will catch sharks and take samples from them so that we can get more information about their diet and where they're moving, which will also helps us hopefully protect these sharks, because as we know, many sharks are endangered and they are at risk from human influence like fishing and habitat loss and other factors like that. One of the projects I'm working on is right here off of Miami. And this weird contraption that I'm holding in my hands is actually a float that is attached to a clamp that we can clamp on a shark's fin, and all of those funny contraptions sticking out the side they collect data on how fast the shark is moving, if they're hunting or not. And so you attach this on a shark's fin, it stays on for about 24 hours, and then the pieces holding it together dissolve and it pops up and sends a satellite signal so that we can go retrieve that float and collect all that data. So this is just a really wide variety of what I'm working on. And again, the biggest thing about this is that it means I get to be on the ocean all the time looking for sharks. So it's really a dream job. But I'm not in the field all the time. A lot of time, this is what my day looks like, which is sitting on my computer with some coffee and my to-do list and planning my next big trip or working on data analysis. So I think that's one big thing that a lot of people don't realize about being a scientist. I am super lucky that I get to go in the field quite a bit, but most of my days actually look just like any other job where you're sitting down doing work or writing on your computer. Although I have to say, I much prefer the days when we get to go out in the field. Sometimes we have really amazing conditions to go out in the field. This was taken in the Caribbean in an island called Bonaire, or I guess it's Curacao. And as you can see, the water is crystal clear. We just get to walk off that dock with our dive gear and see tons of fish and coral around us right away. But it's not always that nice in the field. Typically, if you've scheduled dates that you're going to go out and collect data, you're going to do it whether it looks like this or it looks like this. And I have a quick little video to show you about how sometimes it's not always a good time. This was taken in Fiji, and the conditions were so rough that I had to wedge myself in between our supplies and the side of the boat so I wouldn't go overboard. And you can't tell from this video, but it was really cold too. So some days look like this, some days look like this. And that's one of the joys and frustrations of field work. Oops. But one thing that I want to talk to you about today is related to some research that I did when I was at the University of North Carolina. And one of the really exciting things that I love about marine ecology is that it's a really, really broad field. And it means that I'm able to pursue a lot of different types of projects because I have a lot of different interests. So as I said, I'm working on sharks right now, but an area that I was working on just recently, and I'm still working on, is about seafood. So I mentioned that I'm interested in the ocean and also how people interact with the ocean. And a major way that people interact with our ocean is through eating seafood. How many of you guys like seafood? Anyone out there likes fish? I know some of you guys, yeah, right? So a lot of people around the world like to eat fish. You're not the only ones. So the oceans serve as the world's largest source of protein. And over 3 billion people around the world depend on the ocean as their primary source of protein. This is where a lot of their dinners come from. It's also a really, really big industry that gives jobs to a lot of people. Marine fisheries employ over 200 million people, and the industry is valued at $3 trillion a year, or about 5% of the entire global market. So fisheries are a really, really important part of our culture and our society and our industry. But we also know that they take any time that we're taking fish out of the ocean, that might have an effect on the ocean. And a lot of times it does, especially if we fish too many. 1/3 of the fish populations are overfished, meaning we have taken out more fish than that population can sustain in the long term. So we really need to think about how we can safely manage our ocean resources so that we can continue to enjoy fish and that the ocean can continue to be healthy and sustainable. So the area that I am interested in is called seafood mislabeling, which is when a seafood product is actually labeled as something other than what it actually is. So for example, there was a report that came out last year out of Europe that fish and chips, you know, the like fried breaded fish that's delicious, some of the fish and chip shops were serving actually fried endangered shark meat. So that's not good, right? If we think we're getting a nice white flaky fish that's sustainably harvested, but what we're actually getting is endangered sharks, that's really bad news for those shark populations. So understanding that what we're eating is actually what we think it is important. So I was interested in this one particular species of fish, and it's called red snapper. So I live on the East Coast. I've always lived on the East Coast and of the United States. And red snapper is a really, really important fish species in the South Atlantic, so or the Western Atlantic. So along like North Carolina down to Florida, also in the Gulf of Mexico. It's a fish that is fished both commercially, meaning like people fish it to sell on the market, and also recreationally, like if you've ever gone out with family or friends to just fish for fun, a lot of people like fishing for red snapper for fun. But it's also a really, really delicious fish to eat. And we know from previous studies that red snapper is actually really frequently mislabeled. So a lot of times when people are eating what they think is red snapper, they're actually eating something else. So I set out to collect a bunch of red snapper samples from North Carolina down to Florida. And my goal was to go to seafood markets, sushi restaurants, and grocery stores and genetically test those seafood samples to see if it was actually red snapper. So this is me in North Carolina. This is my car. It's called Scoob, like Scooby-Doo, but it's Scoob with a Subaru. And I drove down the East Coast and collected fish samples. So I just went into grocery stores, bought what they called red snapper, and I put them in this cooler in the back of my car. Now I can tell you that if you're driving for 10 hours a day with a bunch of fish in the back of your car, it starts to smell. So fortunately, it was just me in the car. However, by the end of my 2-week road trip, I was pretty over the smell of fish. I had to wait a little while before I got used to it. But I was buying whole fish that looked like this. This is red snapper, but also seafood fillets. So, you know, when you buy a fish and it's already chopped up, ready to be cooked. And I took them, the samples from the fish and then back to the lab where I was able to actually use their DNA to test and see which fish it actually was. So I got dozens and dozens of samples, brought them back to the lab, and used this method called DNA barcoding, which will identify fish to the species level. And what I found was pretty crazy. Almost 3/4 of my samples that were supposed to be red snapper were not actually red snapper. They were different species that came from all over the world. Some of them were fish that are also found off the Atlantic, different types of snapper, but some of them were imported from outside the United States or not even from North America. So red snapper is supposed to be a fish that is found only in North America. So if we are substituting imported fish for red snapper, that means that now we're shipping fish from other parts of the world all the way over here and selling it for higher prices under red snapper. 1/3 of the species of the samples were actually tilapia. Has anyone heard of tilapia? It's a type of fish that is easily farmed. So red snapper you can only catch in the wild, but tilapia you can farm it. But the main thing about tilapia is that it is much less expensive than red snapper. So essentially what people were doing is they were taking this farmed fish that's maybe worth a couple dollars per pound and selling it as red snapper and able to get lots more money for that fish than what it was actually worth. And almost half, as I mentioned, of those species substituted for red snapper were not actually from the area where red snapper is from. And you can see it's really, really hard to catch seafood mislabeling. Here's an example of 3 whole fish that I got in my collection. And the top one is a species called lane snapper. And then the bottom 2 are red snapper. But you can see the lane snapper and that middle red snapper look a lot alike. It would be really, really difficult to just look at it and be able to tell the difference between the 2. In fact, the 2 red snappers actually look far more different than that lane snapper and the red snapper. So it could be that some people are intentionally mislabeling the fish, but it could be that we also are just having people make mistakes when they label the fish species. And it's important that we understand what fish we're eating because that has implications for management of those fish species. You know, if those fish are being mislabeled before they hit the dock, it could mean that we don't have accurate numbers about how many fish we're actually taking out of the ocean. Also, there's some health implications. You know, there are some fish that are big fish that have what's called bioaccumulation of mercury. So they actually build up mercury in their bodies. And we found in other studies instances of fish that were supposed to be safe to eat with low mercury, but they were actually substituted with fish with high levels of mercury. So there's health implications too. And also, it really just scams you if someone is selling you a $2 fish if someone is selling you a fish for $14 and it's really only worth $2, then that's a problem. They're scamming you out of money. So there are some things that we can do, you and I, to help this problem. And one is to just start really paying attention to the types of seafood that's available to you. So here, for example, as I said, I lived in North Carolina for a while. The North Carolina state offers information on their website about what fish is local and in season in the area, so that when I go to the grocery store, I can look for these specific types of fish and try to support these local fisheries. A lot of mislabeling happens because people aren't really sure about what fish are available in their area, and they go to a couple of ones that they know already off the top of their head. So doing additional research about what fish you should be finding in your area will help decrease instances of mislabeling. Also, we should always be thinking about the types of seafood that we eat. So has anyone heard of the Monterey Bay Aquarium? It's in California. It's really cool if you ever get the chance to go. But they put together something called Seafood Watch, where they make little guides that no matter where you are in the United States or in North America, you can look up the best fish that you can eat for the environment and also for your health. So in this case, we can see that like catfish is a really good choice. Salmon from New Zealand is a good choice. Farmed shrimp from the United States is a good choice. But then it also tells us what fish we should avoid. Like we really shouldn't be eating imported mahi-mahi or skipjack tuna that's caught a certain way. So this list is put together based on fish that is healthy, that is sustainably farmed, and that's good for us to eat. Lastly, the best thing we can do is really ask questions of our vendors when we go buy seafood. You know, a lot of times we just take things at face value, but if you ask people when you go to the grocery store, where is this shrimp from? Or why, how is this actually red snapper or is this something else? If we start to ask more of the vendors that sell us seafood, they're gonna think, oh, wow, people are starting to ask about this. We need to be able to answer their questions about where this seafood comes from. So that is a really quick overview about myself and also about some of the research that I do. I also hope that I left you a little bit hungry for seafood, but also really interested in making sure that we're eating good, healthy seafood for the ocean. But I want to now end my presentation there so we have enough time for everyone's questions. And just a side note, I told you I have lots of different interests. This is a photo of research that I did in the Florida Keys, where I was looking at invasive lionfish, which are really, really good to eat too. So I'm happy to take any questions about, I know those 3 areas of research, sharks, seafood, and lionfish are pretty different, but it just goes to show that one of the best things about studying marine ecology is that you get to study all sorts of different questions that you like. So I'm gonna switch back so that I can see you. I'll stop share.
All right, success, You're back.
I'm back.
All right, Erin, thanks for sharing that with us. You're doing some awesome work in ocean conservation, and it was great to hear a little bit about it today. I want to give a quick shout out to some classrooms who have started introducing themselves on YouTube. Don't forget other classrooms to introduce yourselves and send in questions. Looks like we have Mrs. Risinger's group from Deepwood Elementary. We also have middle school students from Hillfield Strathland College in Hamilton, Ontario. So we look forward to stealing some of your questions soon. But let's get started here. Let's go to Glenview, Illinois. We've got some students hanging out with Miss Michael. Let's get that microphone turned on.
Hey.
How are we doing, Glenview?
How you doing? Good. All right. Okay, we've got 2 if we can. One
Absolutely.
quick one anyway. Here we go.
What's the biggest and smallest shark you've ever seen?
Oh, wow. Okay, the biggest and smallest shark I've ever seen. So I was in Fiji a couple years ago, and I did a dive where there were 50 bull sharks swimming around, and there was a couple of those bull sharks were really big. They were like, let's see, 14 feet or over 3 meters long. And those were pretty big sharks. We had to be really careful not to make big movements or to spook them in any way. And the smallest shark I've ever seen, that's a good question. I saw a juvenile or a baby nurse shark one time, and nurse sharks are really sweet. They sit on the bottom of the ocean floor, and that guy was pretty tiny. But I really like the big sharks though.
All right, very cool. I had the pleasure of diving with the great hammerheads in Bimini, and that was pretty wild.
Yeah, that's where that photo was taken, in Bimini. Yeah.
All right, very cool. Let's see, let's go to Mrs. Nagy's group. They're 5th graders in Flemington, New Jersey. Let me get that microphone turned on. How we doing, New Jersey?
Good.
All right, we're ready.
Okay, so my question is, what is your least favorite part of your job?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say, even though I love field work can be really unpredictable. So for example, I've been trying to do this project in the Bahamas, but in order to do so, we need to go to this kind of remote area, and the wind has been really, really strong for like 2 months. And so we haven't been able to get out there because it's not safe to go out there on the boats. So I am a planner, and I really like to have things planned out in advance. But in field work, you just have to be flexible because sometimes the weather changes or gear breaks or whatnot. So I think one of the best skills you can have as a scientist is being flexible. So that's probably my least favorite. I wish there was a little more predictability, but that's also part of the fun.
All right, fair enough. Let's go to Mr. Kim's group, some high schoolers hanging out with us in Owen Sound, Ontario, here in Canada. Let's get that mic on. How are we doing today, Owen Sound?
Yeah, awesome. We have a question over here. Do you want to put it there?
Do the sharks ever attack you or get upset when you take samples from them?
So that's a good question, because they're big animals, and the sharks, we operate in a way that we try to minimize any stress on the shark. And you can also, when you flip the shark over, it kind of puts them in this trance to try to and relax them. However, if the shark is too stressed, we just will cut the sampling short and let them go, because we want to make sure that these sharks swim off healthy and able to keep going. Yeah.
All right, very important. We are going to jump now to Anchorage, Alaska. There is a big group of students hanging out with Mrs. Carton right now. Let me get that microphone turned on. Let's see how loud Anchorage can be. How are we doing, Alaska?
Woo!
All right, awesome.
Are there any fish in Alaska that we should like watch out for that are endangered?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, I haven't worked in Alaska because I've mostly worked on areas that are accessible to me on the East Coast. However, Monterey Bay Aquarium, what I was just showing about that list of different good, good alternatives and bad fish to eat, they have area specific guides. So you can go on the Monterey Bay Aquarium website and look up the Alaska guide, and it will tell you the best fish to eat, and ones you should avoid. So I don't know any off the top of my head, but that's something that's really easy to discover.
All right, very cool. It's great that organizations have, taken the initiative to do that, because trying to find out on your own is not easy.
Oh yeah. I mean, I work with fish and it's still so complicated sometimes to figure out what the right fish is to eat. So the fact that they make it as easy as possible for you is really a game changer.
Okay, I'm going to grab a question off YouTube. And Miss Mitchell's or Mr. Mitchell's class is wondering, where do you see careers in marine ecology in the next 10 years?
That's a really good question. So I think that if you look at historical papers in the field of marine ecology, a lot of the discussion was about, discovery of different organisms and, I would say science for the sake of science. So figuring out how things worked just to enhance our knowledge. And I think the field has really shifted to a lot of people in my generation of marine science. A lot of it is focused on conservation, right? So we know that our oceans are in trouble because of warming and because of overfishing and coral bleaching and all sorts of these other problems. And so a lot of the research now and a lot of the interest and a lot of the funding is around how we can use science to help understand how these systems are responding to these changes and what we can do to help protect them. So I definitely see that continuing in marine ecology, that there's really this focus on conservation instead of just expanding our knowledge.
All right. Miss Michael's class, let's turn your mic on again. Do you guys have a follow-up question?
Riley and then Eve. Okay, we've got Riley and then Eve if she can.
Perfect.
Hello, I'm Riley. And what is your favorite species of fish?
Ooh, what's my favorite species of fish? That's a good question. I really love, oh, am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we still got you.
Okay. Called the frogfish. So if you've never seen it, you should definitely look it up, because the frogfish has this really interesting adaptation where their fins kind of stick out from the side and they can actually walk along the seafloor. And they have really, really good camouflage. So they can blend in. Different species of frogfish can like blend into rock or coral or even algae. They grow up these kind of appendages that make them look like they have algae growing on them. And I love frogfish because they're really weird. But I also, if I could expand it to my favorite ocean animal, broadly speaking, my favorite animal is the octopus, specifically the blue-ringed octopus, which is this tiny golf ball sized octopus that is so venomous that if you're ever bitten by it, it would be really bad news for you. But it's also beautiful.
All right.
And Eve?
My question is, how and where do you catch the lionfish?
Yeah, great question. So lionfish are an invasive species in the Western Atlantic and Caribbean. So here where I am in Florida, there's lots of lionfish right off the coast. I would go down to the Florida Keys, which are a series of islands in South Florida, to catch lionfish. But you can catch them all throughout the Caribbean and all the way down into South America too. But they're originally from the Indo-Pacific region.
All right. Miss Nagy's group, your microphone's on again if you guys have another question.
What's your favorite type of seafood to eat?
Oh, that's a good question. I love shrimp. I think shrimp's my favorite, especially like local shrimp that you can find. You know, when I lived in North Carolina, there's really good shrimp you can get off of North Carolina. Down here in Florida, especially some of that Gulf shrimp. Although you can, in my opinion, you can really tell with seafood mislabeling, like they also mislabel shrimp, and imported shrimp that is like mass farmed is really like not as good as like wild caught shrimp. So yeah, I think that's my favorite with some cocktail sauce. Yeah.
All right, sounds pretty good. Mr. Kim's class, back to Canada. Do you guys have a follow-up?
Hi, so I'm just wondering, how did your teachers and or professors shape your future to become a scientist?
Oh, that is such a good question. And I love that question because I think for a lot of people, including myself, when you ask it, there's instantly like a couple of specific people that come to mind. And there were two for me. One, I actually never saw myself going on to get my PhD, which is I'm in a PhD program right now. And then I had a professor my sophomore year of college who was this incredible woman that had gotten her PhD like pretty young. And it was the first time I had a female marine science professor, and just that made such a difference for me to like see someone that I could relate to who had gone on to do that. The other one I will say is I applied for a National Geographic grant when I was an undergrad, and I almost didn't apply because I didn't think I would ever get it. And I had this one professor that I was talking to her about it, and I was like, well, maybe I'll wait a couple years, you know, I'm only an undergrad and whatever. And she was like, why would you wait? What possible reason, what could you lose by just applying for it? And seemed so simple, but I hadn't thought of it that way. And I applied and I got it. And that's what I did my lionfish research on. And now that's my philosophy, is like, you can't get opportunities that you don't apply for. Like the worst thing that could happen is that you don't get it and you try again. In order that I did a bunch of work in Fiji, and in order to get the money to do that, I had to apply to grants 4 or 5 times. Oh, sorry, my dog just pulled out my charger. I had to apply 4 or 5 times to get the money to do it, and I kept getting turned down until finally someone said yes. So those are the two big moments that I think of.
All right, very cool. Well, I think there's 2 really good takeaways there. You know, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, so might as well, right? And then that, you know, as early as university, there's early career grants at National Geographic where, you know, something you're interested in, a project, you know, you could very well get some funding to try something out. All right, very cool. Let's go. Oh, we got to go back to Alaska. Microphone is on.
What's your favorite type of shark and why do you like it?
Great
Why do you
question.
like ocean creatures?
Oh, well, I'll talk about the shark. So my favorite type of shark, I think, is probably the hammerhead, because I work on them right now and they're also just so cool looking and so different. I also really, really like whale sharks. I've never seen one, but I've always wanted to see one. I just think they're gorgeous and massive. But you know what? I'm not picky. I'm an equal opportunity shark enjoyer. So I'm happy anytime I get to see a shark.
I think I can second you on that one. Anytime you see a shark and anytime the shark sticks around for a little bit is always really good. I think a lot of students always ask, aren't you scared when you're in the water with the sharks? Well, a lot of times when a shark sees you and all the bubbles coming out, you're lucky to get a picture before they decide to leave. So it's always great when they stick around for a little bit.
And you know, I had that picture of a hammerhead shark. I was taking video of that too. And what you don't hear, or what you can't tell just from that photo, is all through the video, I'm just screaming into my regulator, "This is so cool," just over and over again. And no matter how long I'm in this, I mean, I haven't been in there in the field that long, but even to this day, it's never not exciting to see a shark.
All right, so I'm going to steal a 2-parter from online. 1 part's from Mr. Mitchell's group and 1 part's from Mrs. Risinger's group. And the first part is about the red snappers and the mislabeling. Is it not possible sometimes to tell by the taste if it's the different fish? And then Ms. Risinger's group is really curious about your favorite location or maybe a spot you want to go back to?
Good question. So I'm glad that you asked about the red snapper, because that's a really big part of seafood mislabeling. It is really, really difficult to tell fish species apart a lot of times just by taste. So if you think of a lot of the fish species that are popular and that we like to eat, they have this white flaky fillet that's easy to mix in a bunch of different recipes. And so, I mean, even as long as I've studied them, as long as I've tried, I mean, I can't tell the difference just by taste alone. And especially if you bread them and fry them or put them with lemon butter sauce, like it's just really difficult to tell. And if you have a fillet instead of the whole fish, you can't look at a fillet and be able to visually tell what species it is. So that's why we use genetic analysis, where I take a section, a small piece, only about a fingertip worth of the seafood, and I extract the DNA and then make a lot of copies. It's called amplify that DNA, so that I can see for this very specific region of the whole genome, there's this one area that varies between different fish species. So a lot of the work now is about how do we improve that technology to do that in real time. So maybe we can go to seafood markets and test them right there and see what it is. And I'm sorry, the other question is, where do I want to go back to? Let's see. I really loved the Galapagos. It's just such an interesting, unique ecosystem, and you have a lot of big animals. You don't have the crystal clear water like you do in the Caribbean, but just, you'd be diving and then these sea lions would just run by and play with you. And actually we're doing this one experiment where I had to lay, we call it a transect tape, which is essentially just a really, really long measuring tape. And it kept getting messed up because the sea lions would come along after you laid it down and bite it and play with it and swim away with it. And that was just one of those unexpected things that you never think you're going to have to deal with as part of your job. You're like, today's challenge is, how do I get the sea lions to stop playing with us? So.
All right, very cool. I've got very fond memories from the Galapagos, especially the sea lions, and they'd like to try and tug on your fins too. You'd feel a tug behind from a follower. It's pretty cool. I think we can squeeze in maybe one or two more, Erin. So our classroom's on camera. If you send someone up to the camera or give me a wave, I'll know to come back to your group. So we'll start off with Miss Michael's group. Your microphone is on.
All right.
What have you ever seen a blobfish?
Oh, I've never seen one, but aren't they so cool? They just look totally wild. Oh, hi, who's that? Is that a leopard gecko?
Oh, here, let me turn their mic back on.
Yes, that's our class pet, and he's been watching the whole time. So.
Oh, you know what? I also have a pet leopard gecko. I have two, actually. Their names are Darwin and Linnaeus.
All right. Did Darwin celebrate Darwin's big birthday the other day?
He got some extra crickets. They both
All right.
did.
Perfect. Very cool. Miss Nagy, I think I see someone up at their microphone.
So what is your favorite thing that you've done for your job?
My favorite thing I've done for my job, I'm really lucky that almost all of the field work is really collaborative, right? There's you can't do it alone. So you work in teams, and I've been really lucky in that the teams that I've gotten to work with are just incredible. And so it means that, you're traveling to these kind of remote areas, and you've got a lot of work that you have to get done. But then at the end of the day, you get to be in this incredible location with people that you really like, who also share this passion. And I think that's my favorite thing, is the people that I've gotten to meet. I just feel so lucky that I get to work with them. So, and I will say, especially in honor of this month, I've gotten to work with so many incredible women. The amount of women in the biology PhD program that I'm in, especially in marine science, is like significantly higher than the number of men we have in the program. So we have great representation there.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we should visit Alaska one more time, because I know there's a lot of students there. There's got to be one more question. So let me get that mic turned on.
First hand up. All right. Awesome. Okay. Give us 2 seconds. She's coming forward.
So Erin, as well, when we finish this, when we wrap up today, if you can stick around for just an extra minute, our group in Alaska is going to get a selfie with you.
Excellent. Oh, I'd love that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, we're ready for you.
Can you list 5 critically endangered fish?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Can you list 5 critically endangered fish?
Oh my gosh, it's like a quiz question. Let's see. 5 critically endangered fish. Well, there are a lot of endangered sharks, and you know, great hammerheads are endangered. I feel like I'm being quizzed right now. Critically endangered. Who's do you know? Critically endangered?
I would say 2 really shark species to think about are the sawfish.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
And then the angel shark. Some angel shark species I know are their populations have dropped a lot. But the scary thing, and you know this for sure, Erin, is that a lot of shark species and other large species like tuna and other predatory fish, their populations, some of them have dropped, 90%. And that's really scary. It just really goes to show that that fishing industry that you talked about, there's a massive fishing industry, and we're so good at fishing now that we're actually fishing out a lot of those really important predatory keystone species. And so the sharks are really good examples of species that are in trouble right now.
Red snapper, I was talking about with seafood, their populations decreased by over 90% until there was an actual, you couldn't fish for them anymore. You weren't allowed to fish for them. And so a lot of these conversations about the importance of fisheries management is how are we able to rebuild those fish stocks, we call them stocks, so that they're at healthy levels again. And especially one of the things is we've been fishing for a really, really long time, as long as humans have been around. So what we think is healthy really is probably fewer fish than what that would actually be a healthy ecosystem. So it's also really about calibrating our perception of what a healthy ecosystem looks like. And we can all help by making good, sustainable choices with our seafood as well.
Yep, absolutely. And one other example that I want to share too is the marine protected areas. So there's a really good example of a place, Cabo Pumo in, Mexico, where the fish species had plummeted and the industry had pretty much collapsed. And so they protected a large area and then only took from the area around when, fish would leave that area. You can only have so much fish in one area. And it's a huge success story by protecting this one marine area and then fish leaving that area. It stimulated the local economy again. They could fish again. And it all started with protection and doing it in a sustainable way. So I think that's a big direction that, we have to go with protecting our oceans, is protecting areas and then taking sustainably from those areas. Yeah. All right. Well, very cool. So Erin, thank you so much. It was great to hear a little bit of your shark research, because I think the last time that we connected, I think you were still kind of wrapping up some of the seafood and the red snapper identification. So it's great to hear that you're doing some awesome shark research, and I hope you get to the Bahamas soon to do some more research.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I can't believe, it was just a year ago I was applying for PhD programs, and now I've moved on south. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. It was really great to meet all of you. And I hope that some of you also choose to go into the field of marine ecology. We need as many people as we can get. So hopefully we'll see you there.
All right. Last thing I'll do is I'll turn the mics on, boys and girls. A big goodbye and thank you before we sign off for today. Here we go.
Bye. Thank you so much.
All right, perfect. Thanks everyone for hanging out today. Check out the website. We still have a whole bunch more events coming up over the next 2 weeks, and we hope to see your classrooms again. Thanks everyone.